When a former royal challenges Britain's sharpest tongue on live television, the result isn't just awkward, it's explosive. Tonight, witness how Meghan Markle pushed Graham Norton past his limit until he did something no one thought he'd ever do: kick her off his show. What began as playful banter quickly escalated into a brutal clash of egos and pride, proving that even Britain's most charming host has his breaking point when respect is thrown out the window. The iconic set of the Graham Norton Show gleamed under its purple and red studio lights. The cameras rolled as Graham spun around in his chair, flashing that trademark mischievous grin at his audience. Everyone knew they were in for a good night. After all, his guest was none other than Meghan Markle, a figure who had captivated, divided, and exhausted public opinion in equal measure. Graham adjusted his cufflinks theatrically before announcing, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Meghan Markle." The audience erupted into polite, if hesitant, applause as Meghan emerged from backstage in a form-fitting green dress, her hair in perfect waves. Her heels clicked sharply on the stage floor, echoing through the silent parts of the studio. She flashed her rehearsed smile and raised her hand in a queenly wave that felt more ceremonial than warm. "Meghan, wonderful to have you here," Graham said as he stood to greet her, offering the customary air kisses. "Thank you, Graham. Lovely to be here," she replied coolly, her eyes darting briefly to the cameras as though checking her angles before settling on him. From the beginning, there was tension. Not the kind that comes from nerves, but the kind that comes from two people already engaged in a battle of unspoken wills. Meghan sat on the infamous red sofa, crossing her legs precisely, her hands resting in her lap. Graham wasted no time getting into his signature banter. "So, Meghan, the whole world seems to have something to say about you lately. You're practically keeping half the British tabloids in business. Is that the plan? Stimulate the economy single-handedly?" The audience chuckled at the cheeky remark, but Meghan's smile barely reached her eyes. "Well, Graham," she said evenly, "I wouldn't expect you to understand the complexities of living your life under constant attack, but I wouldn't call it stimulating the economy. More like feeding vultures." "Oh, good heavens," Graham replied lightly, though his eyebrow twitched ever so slightly. "Feeding vultures? Surely you've had your share of choice words too. Interviews, a book, a Netflix series. You've given them plenty to chew on." Meghan tilted her head with the faintest smirk. "I'm sorry, Graham. Is this your show or their show? Are you here to interview me or just regurgitate tabloid nonsense?" The audience's laughter this time was nervous, and Graham's grin tightened. But true to his form, he leaned back, clasping his hands over his knee. "Oh, I assure you, Meghan, these are my questions, though I admit they're probably what everyone watching at home is dying to hear." "Well," she said crisply, "perhaps you should think about asking better questions." And with that, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. The subtle jabs gave way to open hostility as Meghan's composure slipped and Graham's patience began to fray. What started as clever banter now felt more like a duel in front of millions. You could feel the studio air tighten with every exchange, as Meghan's sharp tongue clashed with Graham's legendary wit. But even Britain's favorite host can only take so much. Graham took a sip from his water glass, his eyes narrowing just slightly as he set it down. "So, Meghan," he said smoothly, "you've always championed honesty and openness. Let's be honest then. Do you ever regret leaving the royal family? Or is everything just exactly as you planned it?" Meghan's lips tightened before she responded. "Regret? No. I regret trusting people who didn't deserve it. But leaving? Absolutely not." Graham leaned forward, resting his elbow on his knee. "You say that quite convincingly, though some might say you've made a career out of walking away from obligations." The audience gasped softly at the bluntness of the question, and Meghan's head jerked toward him, her smile gone. "Excuse me? Is this how you treat all your guests, Graham? Or is this just for me?" "Oh no," he said, letting his trademark smirk return. "Just the special ones." Meghan laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Well, I suppose you have to provoke someone to make good television. Is that what you're doing here? Because it feels more like bad therapy." The audience tittered at her comeback, but the laughter quickly died as Meghan turned more cutting. "You know, Graham, for someone who thrives off other people's stories, You're surprisingly bad at listening to them. Graham's eyes flashed with something sharper now. Oh, I listen just fine, Meghan. I just happen to know when a story is a performance instead of reality. That clearly struck a nerve. Meghan sat up straighter, her tone hardening. Performance? Are you implying that my life is some kind of act? Well, Graham replied lightly, you are an actress. The crowd erupted into a mix of gasps and nervous laughter. Even the band in the corner exchanged uneasy glances as Meghan's cheeks flushed crimson. You know what? She shot back, her voice rising just enough to echo. At least I know who I am. I'm not hiding behind a desk, making snide remarks about other people because I'm too afraid to take risks myself. Graham's mouth twitched into a thin line, his hands clasping tighter. Well, at least I don't mistake victimhood for courage. The room froze. Meghan blinked at him, genuinely stunned for a beat, before the familiar mask of poise returned. You really think you're clever, don't you? Sitting up here every week, mocking people's pain for ratings. Better than monetizing it, Graham shot back without missing a beat. The audience collectively inhaled, the tension between them now crackling like static. Meghan leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. Careful, Graham, she hissed, her voice low but dangerous. You're about one question away from making a very big mistake. Oh, Graham replied, his voice matching her edge. And what mistake would that be? Asking you what everyone else is already thinking? Meghan's laugh this time was sharp and humorless. No, Graham, forgetting that you're not untouchable. The silence that followed was deafening, the audience shifting in their seats as if afraid to even breathe too loudly. Graham simply leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of his lips, studying her like a chess opponent considering his next move. Touché, he murmured finally. But let's see how long you can keep this up. By now, the tension was unbearable. Even the audience could feel it in their bones. Meghan's sharp words had pierced through every polite boundary, but Graham's legendary patience was wearing thin. What began as witty banter had turned into a battle of egos, and the cracks were starting to show. But no one expected just how far Meghan would push, or how Graham would respond. The studio felt like it was holding its breath. Meghan sat rigidly on the famous red sofa, her arms crossed now, eyes flashing. Graham, usually so unflappable, sat quietly, his smirk replaced with a thin line of irritation. Even the audience, who had come expecting laughter and lighthearted gossip, were now afraid to cough. Well, Graham finally began, breaking the silence. At least we can agree on one thing. You're consistent, consistently combative. Meghan let out a sharp laugh. You're hilarious, Graham. A man who's made a career out of needling guests thinks I'm combative? How original. He raised an eyebrow. Not original, Meghan. Just accurate. She tilted her head, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Oh, do you get a medal every time you insult a guest, just enough to make headlines, but not enough to get canceled? Is that how this works? The audience gasped, and a few even chuckled nervously. Graham's lips twitched, but not into a smile. Oh, don't flatter yourself, Meghan. I've had far more challenging guests than you. Meghan leaned forward, her voice dropping low, the kind of quiet that cut deeper than shouting. I'm sure you have, but tell me, how many of them left this stage wishing they'd never agreed to come here? Graham's jaw flexed ever so slightly, and he adjusted his cuffs deliberately before responding. The ones who confuse accountability with cruelty usually do. For a fleeting moment, Meghan faltered, but she quickly recovered, her voice rising slightly. Oh, please. You're not holding anyone accountable here. You're just another cynical old man pretending to be relevant by tearing people down. The words hung in the air like smoke. You could hear a pin drop. Even the band stopped fiddling with their instruments. Graham's gaze hardened. Cynical? He repeated softly, but there was nothing soft in his tone. You're calling me cynical? Meghan didn't flinch. That's right, cynical, jaded, bitter. Take your pick. His nostrils flared just slightly. Better cynical than sanctimonious. Meghan's cheeks flushed, but her lips curled into a faint, defiant smile. That's cute, Graham. Really? Trying to turn this around on me? Is that what you do when you run out of clever insults? Graham shifted slightly, no longer bothering to mask his irritation. Oh, trust me, I've got plenty left. Then Meghan made the mistake that changed everything. You know, she began, her voice now openly mocking, I can see why you've never really made it beyond this sofa. Too scared to do anything real. Too scared to actually create anything. Easier to just sit here, safe, sniping at people who've actually risked something. The audience gasped, and Graham's eyes narrowed to slits. His usually rosy cheeks drained of color. You think sitting here isn't real? You think what I do has no value? That's rich, coming from someone who's turned victimhood into a brand. Meghan's eyes widened, and she actually laughed, a sharp, cutting sound that startled even the cameras into hesitation. Oh, there it is, the truth at last. You just can't stand that I walked away and still became bigger than you'll ever be. You think walking away makes you brave? Graham's voice rose now, and even the producers at the side of the stage looked alarmed. You think abandoning responsibility and then crying about it makes you admirable? Meghan stood then, the movement sudden, defiant. The audience collectively recoiled. You don't get to talk to me like that, she hissed. You don't know me, Graham. You don't know what I've been through. And you don't know when to stop, he replied evenly, though his voice now carried an unmistakable chill. They stood there, both on their feet now, glaring at each other, the iconic red sofa between them like a battlefield. Meghan crossed her arms and took a step closer. You're pathetic. Graham smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. And you're finished. The crowd audibly gasped. Even the lighting seemed to dim slightly, as though the studio itself had sensed something irreparable had just happened. Meghan's fists clenched at her sides, her voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone still picked up. You'll regret this. Oh, my dear, Graham replied just as quietly. I already do. The tension was suffocating now. Both stood rigid, eyes locked, neither willing to back down. But everyone knew something had to give. The air was thick, the audience frozen. Meghan and Graham stood toe-to-toe, a battle of pride and wounded egos, neither one willing to blink first. But even the fiercest storms have an end. And when it came, it was brutal. Nobody in that studio would ever forget what happened next, when Graham finally crossed the line from charming host to decisive judge, and Meghan found herself walking out, her dignity hanging by a thread. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Meghan's arms stayed crossed, her gaze unwavering, though her breathing was now sharp and audible. Graham's hands rested on the back of the red sofa, his knuckles white, his jaw locked. From the audience, someone coughed nervously. Another whispered, "Oh my God," under their breath. The cameras stayed fixed, catching every flicker of tension like a predator stalking prey. Then Graham straightened. His expression had shifted. The mischievous sparkle in his eyes was gone, replaced by something steely and commanding. He adjusted his jacket, smoothed his tie, and spoke, his voice cold, clear, and devastating. Meghan, he said, addressing her formally now, I think we're done here. Meghan blinked as though she hadn't quite heard. Excuse me? You heard me, he replied, standing tall, his voice carrying easily through the stunned silence. This conversation stopped being productive about 10 minutes ago, and as much as I adore spirited debate, he let the words hang, then added, I can't allow my show to become your personal therapy session. Gasps from the audience. Meghan's lips parted, and for the first time all night, she seemed genuinely caught off guard. You're kicking me off your show, she said finally, her voice rising an octave, incredulous. Graham's mouth quirked upward at one corner, but there was no warmth in it. Let's call it bringing the curtain down early, for the sake of everyone here. The producers at the side of the stage exchanged frantic glances, but no one moved. Meghan's hands dropped to her sides, then curled into fists. You don't get to dismiss me like some, she began, her voice trembling now. Some forgettable guest. But Graham cut her off with a single raised hand. Oh, my dear, I'm not dismissing you because you're forgettable. I'm dismissing you because you're unforgettable. For all the wrong reasons. The audience audibly gasped, some covering their mouths, others whispering to each other. A few even clapped, though quickly stopped themselves. Meghan stood frozen, her eyes glassy now, but still blazing with fury. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "You think you can humiliate me? You think this makes you look strong?" Graham's smile sharpened into something like a dagger. "No, Meghan, this isn't about looking strong. This is about reminding you, and everyone else watching, that respect is not optional here, and you left yours at the door." "That did it?" Meghan's lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, she grabbed her clutch from the sofa, stood tall, and spun on her heel toward the exit. The audience didn't dare breathe as she strode to the edge of the stage. The cameras followed her, catching every deliberate step. As she reached the studio doors, she paused, just once, and glanced back at Graham. Her expression was unreadable. Some twisted mix of defiance, anger, and perhaps a hint of regret. And then she was gone. The doors closed behind her with a faint click. The sound echoed in the silent studio like a gunshot. For a long, uncomfortable beat, Graham simply stood there. Then, as though nothing had happened, he adjusted his jacket again, turned to the audience with that familiar twinkle in his eye returning, just barely, and said, "Well, I suppose we'll be needing the bigger sofa next time." The studio erupted, part laughter, part nervous applause, part disbelief. The tension began to dissipate, but the electricity in the air remained. They all knew they'd just witnessed something historic. Even the band picked up their instruments hesitantly, filling the space with a few awkward chords. But everyone, from the crew to the audience, couldn't stop glancing at the exit, half expecting Meghan to burst back through at any moment. But she didn't. As the cameras cut away, Graham let out a slow breath. His shoulders relaxed, but his eyes stayed hard. Whatever storm had just passed, he'd weathered it, but not without scars. And Meghan? Somewhere beyond those studio doors, her heels clicking furiously against the corridor floor, she was already rewriting the narrative, already plotting her next move. But one thing was certain: she wouldn't forget this night, and neither would anyone else. What did you think of this unforgettable clash between Meghan Markle and Graham Norton? Did Graham go too far, or was he justified in asking her to leave? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories from behind